Many states, many provinces in Canada or territories are reopening, which means that we're expecting some consumer demand to be going back or starting to normalize again. Of course, this is still the big unknown. What is that going to look like? As measures could differ by state, consumer behavior could differ by state, and we're really at the stage of where companies start to build plans and start to build strategies to deal with this third stage. Now, John, what are some of the steps that you're trying to set in motion?
So we're trying to use a combined approach with collecting data internally as well as externally. One of the things that our analytics department has done is gone out to our customer base, or a sampling thereof, to try and collect information on what their forecasts are, and by that I mean they're really top level forecasts of what their business is doing, what they anticipate the impact being, what product lines or types of goods are they going to see a lift or a decrease on. And take that information and really try and glean some opportunities from it. We've just gotten some of that reporting back actually yesterday, and so we'll be working on that to try and use that to help make buying decisions or make forecasting decisions going forward.
Yeah.
In addition to that, we've been pulling a lot of internal information, looking at our sales year over year, month over month, lots of different date ranges by product line, by product type. But things of that nature, and providing that information to each of the buyers or planners to be able to look at it and understand what's going on within the business. And really what I find that helps with more than anything is it gives them a level of confidence to allow them to make a better buying decision. Obviously, as you mentioned, if you're talking 40,000+ skewed location combinations, it's difficult to analyze each and every item. You get into analysis paralysis very quickly. And so giving a level of confidence and giving them the information at hand to allow them to make a quick, expedient decision that's relatively accurate and in the best interest of the company, to me, that's probably the most important thing I do in my job on a daily basis, is provide my staff with as much information as they can get. Obviously, we have a great tool that brings a lot of that information to the forefront as well, and makes it easy to access. One of the other things we're looking at doing too, you mentioned earlier, the exception management. I think coming out of phase 2 COVID-19, a lot of businesses need to spend an exorbitant amount of time, more than they would anyway, in this exception management, because we've seen so many changes in buying behavior across lots of different industries. And I think it's really easy for companies to get outside their comfort zone and buy things based on a short period of time, and really end up with a lot of inventory that could really hurt them over a long period of time. I mean, one of the things that obviously personal protective equipment saw an immediate spike in demand in March, and I don't know about the others on in this sector, but we're seeing supply start to catch up to demand very, very quickly. It's always concerning when you see those radical spikes in certain goods. How do you make sure that you don't continue that buying habit going forward, that you make those exceptions and you pull those things out of the forecast? So I think that's going to be one of the biggest things going forward in the next, call it 3 to 6 months, is really managing those exceptions and trying to get ahead of the changes in demand.
Yeah, that's something that I think has always been a problem in supply chain planning, and a bigger problem coming up is the paradigm of in trouble we double. Whenever there's issues, people tend to buy more than they need. I think that might cause a lot of issues in companies that deal with that PPE equipment, because there are shelf life dates, and it could be tremendous weight for financial status of a company when they have that inventory that they cannot sell anymore, especially as demand will be fulfilled via more official channels. Now, I want to talk a little bit about how to determine and how to establish a good forecast for different types of demand patterns. We talked a little bit before. We're going back to normal, and for demand planners, there's a big challenge coming up to work with data that's very unreliable. And I want to talk a little bit about how to do that and where to start. Of course, there's no perfect answer yet. We don't know when this will be over yet, and until then, we're still in stage 2. Obviously, the patterns there's tons of different patterns that could play out. So again, we have the frequent and stable items that sell very often, very stable, typically your bread and butter. But you also, on the other hand, your slow, irregular, and volatile items, especially if branches, if you have a multi-level network, and sometimes your sales could be very, very slow moving or volatile. On the other hand, you have non-seasonal and seasonal demand. And when you're building forecasts as a planner, there's different strategies you'll have to take to make sure that your forecast, or importantly, your inventory, will be correct. Now, when we're looking at items that used to be frequent and staples and non-seasonal, it's actually easy. You can simply omit all your COVID-19 data points. So everything that sold during the last 3 months that was affected, we can simply say, okay, we're not going to use that for future forecasting, and we'll just use the period that comes before that. Now, when we're talking seasonal demand, that's actually a lot more difficult. Because if you omit your data points, it's also not going to be possible to calculate a seasonal profile over it. And if you do use them, then your seasonal profile is going to be off because you have had a dip in demand during COVID crisis, or an increase in demand, depending on what product we're talking about. So what we're discussing with some of our customers, and what we've been testing with, is to actually repair what we call normalized historical demand. And that means that, we're going to take your pre-COVID forecast, and we're just going to make your demand history to be exactly as we forecasted. Now, if this has implications for your forecast accuracy, or your historical deviation or volatility, meaning some buffer stocks might be underestimated, but that can be mitigated in other ways. But overall, you need a good data point to calculate your seasonal profiles over. So if you have something that's frequent and stable and seasonal, you want to be thinking about repairing or normalizing the historical sales. Now, when we're talking slow, irregular, and volatile, and non-seasonal, so these are the items that were already hard to forecast, and now you don't know whether they sold bad just because they always used to sell bad, or because of the COVID crisis. So here we typically recommend to just leave the data intact, because by omitting it or by repairing it, we might be over or underestimating very strongly, and be putting data points in there that might not have happened. So here we kind of say this is more an inventory strategy you'll have to take. Reduce perhaps your branch inventory, increase buffers at a centralized location where you can actually achieve frequent and stable demand. That way you're doing a bit of risk pooling in case of an increased demand. You can still serve it from a central location and a local location very quickly. It's the same for your seasonal, slow, irregular, and volatile demands. You can simply just use your pre-COVID forecast, but also think about centralizing demand, because you don't know how much it was affected and what has changed over the last few months. So it's very important to start classifying your items according to this grid, and build a good strategy for your portfolio. Now, John, we're coming towards the end of this session. What are your thoughts on? I think this crisis has changed the demand and supply planning functions. I think a lot of companies have introduced procedures and processes that otherwise might have taken years to introduce, and they might have created reports that otherwise were not created that will still prove useful. How do you think the supply chain planning function as a whole, so both supply and demand planning, will change for the good? Like, what are things you introduce that you'll keep doing because they just make things better?
Sure. I mean, obviously, this whole situation is going to have a major impact on everything related to supply chain. But I think the demand planning feature of it is going to be one of the biggest impacts of how do you react to these sorts of things? How do you have reporting or exception management tools in place to allow you to react quickly and effectively? We've made some changes in some of our collections and exception management in Slim Stock that we will absolutely keep around. Utilizing the blackout dates or the no ship, no receive dates is something that we had used before. We used it this past Q4 for Black Friday preparation, where we typically transition more to shipping, and also for Chinese New Year to try and get ahead of that. We'll obviously have that in our hip pocket for when things like this happen, and we may see certain geographic regions be impacted by this or something like it again. We have, the survey tools on our side that we've put together. We'll continue to use those throughout the future, not just in times of change, to try and gain more insight from our customers And one of the things that I think that we're going to make even more robust is our supply and operations planning. And we've done a decent job of that. We could certainly do a better job of it. We've been collecting customer forecasts from some of our key customers for the better part of a year now, and having that information and being able to segment that and make changes for those key customers was absolutely critical over the last several weeks, and has allowed us to function at a rate that's kept those customers happy and kept our business strong. On the supply side of it, I think a lot of companies are looking at having multiple sources of supply, both domestic and foreign. I won't get into too much of the detail on what we're doing, but I can tell you this, I am more aware now of being pigeonholed with one supplier than I've ever been in my entire career. So we're obviously looking at opportunities to be able to diversify our supply network.
More risk management for sure. That's been a very popular term since the beginning of all this. What I personally find interesting, and I hear that as a light through your story, is that I think traditionally demand and supply planning comes from a background where we focus really on building good forecasts and buying towards that forecast and achieving our service levels. And I feel during this crisis, we've been transitioning to really putting the word planning in there. You can still achieve your forecast by making sure you're pushing the right product. And then it's really not about forecasting anymore. This is where it truly becomes demand planning. And I feel also on the supply planning side, it's not simply a buying function. It's, as you said, we're looking more at, what are the alternatives? What other options do we have? Can we pull it here? Which are the containers forward? Which are the ones we want to expedite? And it really becomes more of a planning function than it would be a demand or a simple supply function. A lot of companies have been making that transition really fast over the last few months, and I hope that's something we can hold on to and something that will change the function for the better.
You hit on a key point there of developing those plans both for short and long term, and develop the plans, use the data you have at your disposal, and then action on those plans. And I think companies that were doing it are certainly glad they are, and companies that weren't are aware of the need to improve that.
Thanks a lot for your insight and joining us here today, John. I hope everyone has taken valuable lessons from it. If you have any more questions or you want to know more, you can contact my colleague Shruti Rajagopalan at slimstock.com for more information. You can follow us on LinkedIn, visit us at slimstock.com.